The last Christmas party I ever attended as Robert Halston's daughter ended with a room full of laughter and one sentence I never forgot. I handed my father a gift. He lifted it in front of 200 employees, smiled into the microphone, and said, "Thanks to my most useless child." The whole room burst into laughter. My name is Claire Halston. I was 24 years old that night. And before I tell you what happened next, one thing should be clear. This story is presented by the writing team at Revenge Pulse. It was originally created by the authors of the Her Fear channel for educational and inspirational purposes, and it does not portray any specific real-life individual. The Fairmont Ballroom was glowing with gold light, crystal chandeliers, and expensive approval. Halston Freight called it a Christmas party. It was really a celebration for my stepbrother Julian, who was being quietly introduced as the company's future. Even my seat made that clear. Table 17, near the back, not with family, not with executives, just close enough to say I'd been invited and far enough to remind me I didn't belong. Elaine found me first. "You came." I said I would. Her eyes swept over my dress. "Your father wasn't sure you'd have something appropriate." I managed. Across the room, Julian laughed with board members like the night already belonged to him. Then my father took the stage. He praised Elaine. He praised Julian. He praised loyalty, family, and the future. Then his eyes found me. "Well," he said, lifting my wrapped gift, "thanks to my most useless child." Julian laughed first. That was the part I remembered most. I set down my champagne, stood, and looked straight at my father. "Congratulations, Dad," I said. "Tonight is the last night you get access to me." The room went silent. I picked up my clutch and walked out. Behind me, I heard my father call my name. 12 years later, he would say it again across a boardroom table. But by then, why was the man who mocked me waiting on my signature? The drive back to Boston should have taken 3 hours. It took longer because I had to pull over twice just to stop my hands from shaking, at a rest stop near the state line. I sat with the engine running and my phone face down in the cup holder. I didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. "Come back. Don't make this worse. You embarrassed your father. What happened that night at the Christmas party wasn't new. It was just louder. After my mother died, the house didn't break. It reorganized. Elaine moved in with lavender-scented boxes and a talent for changing a room without admitting she had touched it. Julian came with her tall, confident, already acting like the center of gravity had shifted in his favor. Within months, the family photos changed. The old pictures of my mother disappeared from the hallway. In their place were newer ones, Julian with a debate trophy, Julian in a soccer uniform, Julian between Elaine and my father, smiling like he had always belonged there. If I was still in the frame, I was usually at the edge. Elaine never yelled. That was what made her effective. At dinner, she passed Julian the serving dish first. "Growing boys need fuel," she'd say with a light laugh. My father would nod and keep eating. When report cards came home, Julian's stayed on the kitchen counter for days. Mine stayed in my backpack. "That's nice, Claire." My father would murmur if he noticed. But Julian's grades really matter this year. Once, when I was 16. I asked if he'd come to my orchestra recital. He checked his calendar and replied, "That's the same night as Julian's college dinner." "Oh," I said. That was the whole conversation. The only person who ever noticed was my grandmother, Ruth. When Elaine interrupted me, Ruth would calmly say, "Let her finish." It was such a small sentence. But in that house, it sounded enormous. By the time I was grown, being overlooked felt normal. That was the part that took the longest to unlearn. My father called me home on a Wednesday like he was scheduling a meeting, not rearranging my life. "Be here by 6. He said, "I have class. You can miss 1. This matters." When I walked into his study that evening, the papers were already waiting. My father sat behind the desk. Elaine stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder, both of them looking so composed it was obvious this had been discussed long before I arrived. "Sit down. Claire, my father told me." I sat. Elaine slid a folder across the desk. "This is just temporary." I opened it and saw legal language dense enough to blur if I looked at it too fast. "What is this?" I asked. My father folded his hands. "Julian has been accepted into a legacy business program. It's an important opportunity." "That's great for him. It requires some flexibility," Elaine added smoothly. "Your mother's education fund needs to be reallocated for now." I looked up. "Reallocated temporarily," she said. My father nodded. "The company is under pressure. Cash flow is tight. When things stabilize, we revisit everything." I looked back down at the page. Waiver. Release. Relinquishment of claim. The words were colder than the room. "You told Mom you'd protect that money for me," I said quietly. My father's face barely changed. Circumstances change. Elaine tapped the signature line with one polished nail. "You're young. Claire. You'll recover. Julian's success helps the whole family." That was when I understood the truth. In that house, family had become another word for Julian. My father pushed a pen toward me. "We need you to be reasonable. I should have called a lawyer. I should have walked out. I should have demanded time." Instead, I signed. Elaine closed the folder immediately. "Thank you," she said. My father rose from his chair. "We appreciate your maturity." When I got back to campus, my roommate looked up from her desk and asked, "How'd it go?" I set my interview folder in the drawer and answered, "Fine." I didn't unpack it again. Not that year. And looking back now, was that the night they thought they had secured Julian's future, or the night they accidentally set mine in motion? The apartment in Alston was 400 square feet on paper and somehow smaller in real life. The bed nearly touched the wall. The radiator knocked all night like it had opinions. The window faced an alley where delivery trucks idled before sunrise, filling the room with the sound of engines and brakes and people already moving toward somewhere better. I told myself it was temporary. The cafe downstairs opened at 6. By 5:30. I was tying on an apron, pulling my hair back, and breathing in steam, burnt espresso, and old coffee grounds. Most mornings passed in a blur of lids, receipts, and impatient voices. "Extra hot," one man snapped, sliding his cup back across the counter. "Last time it was lukewarm." I remade it. He took a sip, shrugged, and walked out laughing into his phone about a ski weekend in Vermont. There were days Julian would have fit perfectly into that line of customers same age, same confidence, same belief that inconvenience was something meant for other people. During a slow stretch one afternoon, my manager watched me wiping the same section of counter for the third time. "You planning to sand the thing down?" he asked. I looked up. "Just keeping busy." He slid a blueberry muffin toward me. "Keeping busy isn't breakfast." "I'm fine. Didn't say you weren't." "Eat?" So I did. At night, I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open on my knees and took free online courses until my eyes blurred. Operations, systems, supply chains, forecasting. I liked problems that had causes, inputs, rules, outcomes. Unlike people, systems usually made sense if you looked closely enough. Sometimes the radiator knocked so loudly I'd tap it once with my knuckles like we were in conversation. Then morning came, and I went back downstairs in the same clean shirt and practical shoes and started over. No one in that cafe knew my last name. No one cared who my father was. For the first time in years, that felt less like a loss and more like the beginning of something. But if no one in Alston knew where I came from, what kind of woman was I quietly becoming while my family assumed I had already disappeared? The first lease I signed for my business wasn't for an office. It was for a desk. 3rd floor of a converted warehouse near Kendall Square. Shared printer. Bad coffee. A conference room you had to reserve 3 days in advance like it was some rare luxury. I remember standing there with the key in my hand and realizing something simple and wonderful. Nobody cared who my family was. They just wanted the rent on time. That was enough. I registered the parent company as Soundbridge Holdings because it sounded clean, forgettable, and impossible to connect to me unless you were specifically looking. Harborline Strategies operated under it. Quiet by design. I stayed off the website, off the pitch decks, off anything that invited personal attention. When I brought in Daniel Mercer as managing partner, he noticed immediately. "You're really not putting yourself out front?" he asked, flipping through the draft materials. "No, that's unusual. I'm not selling a personality," I replied. "I'm selling outcomes." He studied me for a second, then nodded. Fair enough. Work came slowly at first. Small warehouse audits, route cleanup projects, scheduling problems companies were embarrassed to admit they had ignored for years. I stayed late, checked every model twice, and documented everything. If a solution worked, we proved why. If it failed, we cut it fast. A year later, my grandmother Ruth died. The call came from her attorney. "She left you a separate trust," the woman told me. Separate. That word hit harder than the number. $700,000. Unconditional. No family disclosure. She planned this. I whispered. She was very clear. The attorney replied, "I used part of it to stabilize Harborline, not to show off, not to scale recklessly, just to breathe long enough to grow properly." And we did grow. 11 people, then 12. One afternoon, Daniel dropped a client list on my desk. "We're getting bigger attention," he said. I scanned the names, then stopped. "Halston Freight." Daniel watched my face. "We submit through the formal process. Clean." "Of course," I answered. He smiled once. "Good." And as I closed the folder, I had only one thought. What would happen if the family that erased my name ended up depending on the company built to survive without it? We won the Halston Freight contract on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel came into my office holding the evaluation packet and trying not to smile too soon. "They ranked us first," he said. Technical score wasn't even close. I held out my hand. Comments. He skimmed the page. Strong modeling, clear controls, conservative assumptions. One board reviewer wrote, "Finally, someone who understands where the losses are hiding." That mattered more to me than the ranking. 2 weeks into onboarding, our team found the kind of problem companies pay a fortune not to see. Halston Freight's overnight route model was stacking delays across 3 depots and hiding the cost inside fuel variants and late transfer fees. It looked small in isolated reports. Across a quarter, it was bleeding them millions. Our lead analyst pointed at the screen. "No wonder their margins keep wobbling." I leaned closer, ran the scenario twice, then said, "Shift the routing window, separate exception traffic, and rebuild the handoff sequence by terminal." She blinked. "That'll work. It will if they follow it exactly." They did. Within a month, overnight exceptions dropped hard, late route penalties eased, fuel variants narrowed. At the next quarterly review, our dashboard lit up green. The onboarding itself stayed virtual. Operations leads, legal calls, systems reviews, scheduling teams. I never appeared once. That was intentional. Harborline spoke through process, not personality. And Daniel handled the external relationship exactly the way we had planned. Weeks later, a clip from an industry luncheon made its way around our office. My father stood at the podium in a dark suit, smiling like success had personally chosen him. "We've seen measurable improvements this quarter," he told the room. "Our consulting partners have been transformative. Whoever's running that firm understands discipline." I closed the video before it ended. Months passed. Payments arrived. Renewal language started appearing. Then Daniel dropped a new agenda on my desk. They want 5 more years. Later, I heard my father had told someone, "I've never met their leadership. Doesn't matter. Results speak for themselves." I saved that line. Because what happens when a man praises the work that saved him without realizing it came from the daughter he once called useless? The messages began the morning after I walked out of the Christmas party. Not from my father. He never reached first when he could send other people to do it for him. They came from relatives I barely heard from the rest of the year. A cousin from Connecticut, an aunt who had forgotten my birthday so many times it had become tradition, even one of Elaine's friends, which told me exactly where the concern was coming from. "Are you okay? We're worried about you. Your father says you seemed overwhelmed." I stood in my kitchen in Alston and let the phone buzz beside the kettle. Overwhelmed. That was a neat little word. Wasn't it better than humiliated? Better than mocked? Better than publicly reduced to a family joke in front of 200 people? Elaine called that afternoon and left a voicemail in her softest voice. "Claire, sweetheart, this isn't like you. People are concerned. Maybe you should talk to someone. We can help." I deleted it before she finished. By evening, the messages had changed. Less warmth, more threat. "People are talking. You don't want to damage your father's reputation. We just want to make sure you're stable." Stable. There it was. Not concern. Containment. I forwarded every text, voicemail, and missed call to my attorney, Melissa Grant. She read them fast and called within the hour. "They're building a story about you," she said. "I know. Do you want it to stop?" "Yes." Then we formalize it. An hour later, a letter went out under her name. All further personal contact would be archived as evidence of harassment if false or defamatory claims continued. No anger, no pleading, just a clean legal boundary. After that, the phone went quiet. I felt my shoulders drop as the apartment settled back into silence. That night, while I ate, standing at the counter, one final call lit up the screen. Unknown number. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, my family had reached for the old tools and found they no longer worked. But if pressure and shame failed to bring me back, what would they do when they finally realized I wasn't coming back at all? They arrived together, which told me they were afraid. Robert came in first, shoulders squared, jaw tight, already trying to make my conference room feel like an extension of his authority. Elaine followed with both hands wrapped around her handbag. Julian came last, irritated instead of cautious, which suited him. He had always confused confidence with understanding. I stood when they entered, not out of respect, because it was my office. Robert glanced at the skyline behind me, the glass walls, the neatly arranged renewal packet, and the assistant who had shown them in without once asking who he was. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can handle this privately." "Sit down," I replied. "Or leave." He sat. Elaine followed. Julian stayed leaning over the table. "You can't pull this," he snapped. "Do you even understand what happens if Harborline walks? The renewal is tied to the lender review." I looked at him. "Thank you for proving my point." His expression hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you still think this is just a contract," I said. "It's the compliance sign-off, the transition model, and the operating controls your board already told you not to lose." Robert tapped the final page of the packet. "This is a stunt." "No," I said. "It's signature authority." Elaine's voice came out thin. "Claire, why didn't you tell us I held her gaze?" "Tell you what? That the daughter you called useless built the system keeping your company stable." Julian laughed once. "You didn't build anything. You don't even have a degree." "No," I said. "I have ownership." I turned my laptop toward them. Corporate records, equity structure, signature authority. Every plain legal fact that made denial impossible. Julian went quiet first. Elaine stopped breathing for a second. My father read the screen in total silence. Then he looked up and tried one last version of the old control. "You're being emotional." I almost smiled. 12 years ago, I said, you thanked your most useless child in front of your employees. No one moved. Today, That useless child is the signature standing between you and a very expensive failure. His face lost color. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. My uncle called a week later. I almost ignored the number, but something made me answer. "Claire," he said, voice slower than I remembered. "I'm not calling to defend your father." I stayed quiet. "Your mother never intended that education fund to be shared. It was yours. Ruth found out after you signed those papers. That's why she created the separate trust. She knew exactly what they had done." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because it surprised me, because I had waited years to hear someone say it without excuses. "They stole it," I said. "Yes," he answered. "They did." That was all I needed. Not closure, not forgiveness. Just the truth without decoration. Harbor Line completed the transition the same way we handled everything else cleanly. 90 days. Documentation delivered. Compliance handoff complete. No public spectacle. No press leak. No performance of revenge. Halston Freight survived. Robert did not survive it the same way. Within a month, industry chatter made the rest clear. The board had forced his retirement timeline forward and removed him from final transition oversight. Julian's succession plan was suspended indefinitely, and he was cut from the operating committee after the lender review made it painfully obvious how little he understood the systems he had been pretending to oversee. No scandal, no dramatic collapse, just the kind of reputational damage that follows a man into every room after authority leaves before he does. That was enough for me. The next month, I created a private tuition grant in Ruth's name and my mother's for students whose education had been sacrificed for someone else's convenience. One evening, I sat at the small table I had finally bought, eating from a real plate in a room paid for by my own work, and understood something I should have known years earlier. My father called me useless because he needed me small. In the end, all he really proved was that he had spent years underestimating the only child in that family who knew how to build something that could last. Sometimes the deepest damage comes quietly through favoritism, broken promises, and being told to accept less just to keep the peace. But other people do not get to define your worth. The way they treated Claire shaped her pain, not her future. With skill, patience, and self-respect, it is possible to build a life that no longer depends on the approval of those who dismissed you. If this story stayed with you, let us know where you're listening from and which moment hit you the hardest.